Yeah, usually probably 45 minutes.
Well, it'll be about that by the time we get there, and then you gotta pay to unload. Like,
Yeah.
we should be allowed to do that here on our own without having that problem, but no. Some lame fucking, person instead of standing up for our rights as a town, saying, nope, we're not doing that.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't have any kind of different kinds of clothes.
Yeah, you're gonna have to be busy, I guess.
I'll make pizza. I got blueberry lemon and I'll have orange cranberry and I have one roof over one after. So that's good enough. I don't have time, but I still got to make butter tart to the shell and cheese.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I was bagging in them, labeling and shit like that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
You're lucky you just make it and
store it. Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's not edible, so. That's the only reason I get away with it, because it's not edible.
Yeah, you'd be a lot busier than we are.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, if I was doing what you're doing, yeah. Yeah, I would. Right now, I wouldn't be doing anything because I don't have an oven. I'd be having to go to my daughter's and use her oven, and I'm sure they don't. Her husband wouldn't appreciate that, having his mother-in-law in his face all the time.
Yeah, you'd have to go get your food safe and all that.
Well, I've had that before. You gotta have it to work in a restaurant nowadays.
Yeah.
So I've had to take that course before. It's not that hard. And when I worked at Costco, when I was doing that, I had to do it. Yeah, you have to do a face for food safe course there too. But they help all those foreigners do that. Yeah, they help them answer the questions for them.
Yeah, some of them are trick questions.
I was like, why don't you just write it down for him and give it to him? Like, or, have the test be done already and just have him sign it. Save having to do anything else because I sure ain't gonna fucking be doing that.
For sure. So that's your plan for this 5 to 3.
Yeah, and I'm gonna, if the rain doesn't rain, I'm gonna let it dry out a bit and go after that around the house here with a weed whacker. And Clayton's gonna mow around the cars because he hasn't done that yet. And he better get it done today because I will not, I'll get flippy on him.
Didn't know you need that.
Yep. He is. He is. Alrighty. Okay. You too. Alright. Bye. Oh, That was weird. Here, put this on the charger.
Can't believe you left my cheese out there all night.
You don't cover it up and you just put it back in the fridge. You put it in the fridge? Did you put it away?
No.
Well, then what are you yipping at me about?
I'm pretty soon gonna have to go get more pills.
damn tempted to see Mercury. Not Mercury, but Venus, sorry.
What's that?
I'm playing a game.
Oh. You just about ready to go with me to put the tree in the ground?
Why would I do that?
Because I asked you about doing it and help me with it yesterday, didn't I? Last night?
Discretionary distribution. There were meetings, there were signatures. There were phrases like out of an abundance of caution. In Virginia, people with money are
You were
very
going to
particular
help me.
about
I
language
asked you
around
to do
family
it yesterday.
disgrace. It should have felt like justice. It didn't. It felt like a first chapter. I moved into a narrow brick townhouse on Floyd Avenue with creaky stairs, a postage stamp patio, and radiators that knocked like old pipes in a New York movie every time the heat came on. It was small enough that silence couldn't hide in it. The bedroom looked out over a row of sycamores. The kitchen had butcher block counters and one window above the sink, where morning light hit the faucet hard enough to make the whole room look cleaner than I felt. I bought 2 new towels, a coffee maker, and a basil plant I nearly killed in 6 weeks because grief and overwatering are close cousins. I went back to work. That was the first thing that saved me. Probate law is not glamorous, but it is excellent medicine for self-pity, because somebody is always having a worse week than you are, and they still need the deed filed before 4. I drafted petitions. I organized exhibits. I sat across from women whose brothers had forged their names, sons who had emptied dying fathers' accounts, daughters who found out too late that caregiving and inheritance are not the same kind of loyalty. I did not tell clients my husband had cheated on me with my best friend while skimming the edges of his mother's trust. But every time a woman sat across from me with that particular stunned look, the one that says, I knew something was wrong, but I didn't know it was this wrong. I knew exactly how to hand her a legal pad and tell her where to start. For the first year after the divorce, I saw Graham only at family-adjacent obligations, and trust-related follow-up meetings I would have preferred not to attend, but could not avoid. Helen Mercer asked me to lunch twice. I declined both times the first year and accepted the third invitation only because my mother told me avoiding her forever would turn restraint into theater. Helen chose the Jefferson Hotel tea room, as if we were discussing flower arrangements, instead of the fact that her younger son had detonated my marriage and nearly used her charitable fund as kindred. Baby wool and pearls. I wore gray. She ordered chicken salad and barely touched it. I was ashamed to ask you here, she said after the waiter left. Then why did you? She folded her napkin once. Because I need to say something to you that my generation often says too late. I waited. I wanted very badly to believe Derek was merely weak, she said. Weakness is easier to forgive than appetite. It was one of the only honest things she ever said to me. I did not forgive her that day. But I respected her for naming the truth without trying to soften it. We finished lunch like 2 women who had once expected to be family, and were now trying to decide what remained after disappointment stripped away the convenient parts. When she hugged me goodbye in the hotel lobby, she smelled like Chanel and Bold Brie. Graham says you bought a house plant, she said quietly. A basil plant. Is it alive? Barely. For the first time in months, I almost smiled. Graham did not intrude on my life after the divorce. That mattered more than any grand gesture could have. He did not call under the pretense of checking on me. He did not arrive with casseroles or flowers, or the dangerous warmth of a man who thinks a wounded woman is easier to impress. He behaved the way decent men behave when they understand that timing can turn kindness into pressure. If we crossed paths at Helen's house or a family meeting, he asked how my mother was, whether work was still impossible in tax season, whether the basil had survived. Once in line at Stella's on a Saturday morning, he bought my coffee because the card reader was down, and I only had my phone. He handed me the cup and said, you can pay me back by keeping Helen from signing anything my brother puts in front of her. That was Everest Drive, where Derek was glossy useful, where Derek was ornamental. The second year after the divorce, his wife got sick. Claire Mercer had been one of those women who made every room feel more civilized simply by entering it. She illustrated children's books, wore cashmere in winter and linen in summer, and never once asked me a rude question about children, even though by 44 I had heard every variation of, "So was motherhood never in the cards for me?" Claire and Graham had married late by Richmond standards, and had their daughter Lucy after years of triumph. When Claire was diagnosed with acute leukemia, Lucy was not yet 3. I learned about the diagnosis from my mother, who learned it from Helen, who sounded stunned in the way only mothers of grown men can sound when illness arrives in the house they no longer control. Claire died 9 months later in early spring. I went to the memorial service because not going would have been cruel, and because despite everything that had happened between me and the Mercer family, Claire had once sat beside me at a fundraiser and quietly moved the place card of a man who kept touching my arm every time he laughed. There, she murmured after switching seats with me. That's better. Women remember who notices discomfort without
Now we
being
gotta go
asked.
get a
The chapel
countertop
in
thing
Charlottesville
too.
was full of white flowers and people speaking too softly. Graham stood near the
That
front.
place where we got that. You remember how to get there where we got that roaster pan?
Holding a handkerchief
No.
in both hands.
Wasn't it Range Road 50?
She meant to complete. I had planned to stay only long enough to pay my respects and leave. Instead, after the service, I found myself in the parish hall kneeling beside a little girl in black patent shoes who was trying to peel the wrapper off a granola bar with the fierce concentration of the recently bereaved.
Well, the next time we go shopping, we'll get some new shoes for you.
And nodded once. That was my first real conversation with
Hey?
Lucy Mercer. It lasted maybe 30 seconds.
Hello?
I opened
Hello?
the granola bar. She
How about the next time we go shopping, we get
and
you
she
some
leaned
new
against my
shoes?
knee while she ate, as if children can smell steadiness on a person and are drawn to it before the adults in the room have decided what's appropriate. Graham saw it from across the hall. Our eyes met over Lucy's head. There was exhaustion in his face and gratitude, and something else I refused to name because naming it would have required me to imagine a future I was not ready to imagine. A month later, Helen called and asked if I would sit with Lucy for 2 hours one Saturday, while Graham met with Claire's estate attorney and tried to sort through insurance paperwork. "I know it's not your responsibility," she said before I could answer, "and I would not ask if I had another option to still come." I almost said no, not because I didn't want to help, but because I understood too well how women become useful to families that once failed them. Then I pictured Lucy in those patent shoes with the granola bar, and I said yes. The first Saturday, Lucy colored at my kitchen table while I made grilled cheese and tomato soup. She was 3.5, then solemn in the way some children get after loss, prone to watching a room before she trusted it. She called me Miss Evie. She liked the yellow crayons better. She cut the crust off her sandwich and lined it up beside the plate as if saving evidence. When Graham came to pick her up, he stood in my doorway with a diaper bag over one shoulder and legal folders under his arm, and looked more tired than any man should be allowed to look in a suit. "You don't have to do this again," he said. "I know." Lucy took his hand, then looked back at me. "Can I come next Saturday too?" That was how it began. Not with romance, not with a confession, not with any dramatic realization that fate was repairing what life had broken. It began with soup cooling on my stove, a child choosing the yellow crayons, and a widower too exhausted to pretend he wasn't grateful. By autumn, Lucy knew where I kept the juice boxes. By Christmas, she fell asleep on my couch with her head in my lap during a storm, while Graham sat across from us pretending to read and failing. By the following spring, she had started calling me my Evie, in the possessive way children do when they are quietly staking a claim. And somewhere in the middle of all that, without spectacle or permission, my life began to rebuild itself around a man who never once asked me to perform forgiveness, and a little girl who had no idea she was teaching me how to want a future made. Then one Thursday in late September, 4 years and some change after I walked in on Derek and Vanessa, I got a voicemail from a number I had deleted, but never truly forgotten. "Evie, it's Vanessa." I was sitting at my desk at work, redlining an inventory accounting, when I heard her voice. I did not stop breathing. I did not freeze. That surprised me more than the message itself. I know I have no right to ask you for anything she said, but I'm in a restitution tuition program now, and part of it means making amends where I can. There's something Derek did that your lawyer never found. Something tied to Helen's trust and another account. I think you need to hear it from me before someone else gets hurt. I listened to the message twice. Then I deleted nothing. Because 5 years earlier I had learned that when a person who helped bury the truth calls to say, there's more underground, you do not hang up on the grave. You bring a shovel. My cousin Celia's wedding fell on the first Saturday in October. The kind of Virginia autumn day people spend the rest of the year trying to describe badly. The sky over Charlottesville was a clear blue with that hard-edged brightness you only get after the humidity finally gives up. The vineyard sat on a rise outside town, rows of vines fading gold at the edges. The Blue Ridge hung in the distance like folded paper. White chairs had been set up on the lawn for the ceremony. The reception tent glowed from the inside even before sunset. All cream fabric and chandeliers and strings of warm lights that made everyone look slightly more forgiving than they really were. I drove out with Lucy in the back
Where'd all
seat,
these
my
bastards
garment
come
bag
from?
hanging from the passenger hook, because Graham had been called into an emergency chambers meeting that morning and promised he'd come straight from Richmond as soon as he could. He had kissed Lucy's forehead in my kitchen at 7:30, kissed me too quickly because he was already late. He said, don't let Celia feed our child only wedding cake before I get there. Our child. He said it casually in the soft, distracted voice of a man searching for his car keys while thinking about a federal document. But I had carried those 2 words with me all the way down I-64. Lucy was 4 by then, all serious dark eyes and honey brown curls, but refused to stay inside any barrette for longer than 15 minutes. She wore a pale yellow dress with tiny embroidered flowers at the hem, and white sandals she insisted were grown-up shoes because they clicked faintly on hardwood floors. She had also decided 3 days before the wedding that she wanted me to wear my hair down because it makes you look like a princess warrior. I had laughed so hard at that I nearly burned the chicken in the oven. By the time we reached the vineyard, the bridal suite was already humming with women pinning veils, steaming dresses, and asking where the safety pins had gone. Celia pulled me into a one-armed hug the moment I stepped through the door. You look beautiful, she said, then glanced down at Lucy. And you and Miss are going to break hearts by kindergarten. Lucy took that with the solemn dignity of a child accepting a military promotion. Celia was my mother's sister's daughter, 6 years younger than I was, and somehow both more practical and more romantic than anyone should be allowed to become in the same lifetime. She worked in event fundraising for the university at a lab we could hear across parking lots, and possessed the unnerving gift of knowing exactly when to be blunt. She waited until Lucy had wandered toward the tray of fruit skewers with one of the bridesmaids before lowering her voice. There's something you need to know before you go out there. I knew from her face that this was not about centerpieces. Derek is here, she said, and Vanessa. For 1 second, the room around us blurred into white satin and perfume and distant violin tuning. Vanessa, I repeated. Celia nodded. She called me 2 weeks ago. Said she needed to make amends with several people and asked if she could attend quietly because she used to know Noah and me through you and Derek. I told her no at first. Then she called again and said she had information involving Derek and your old trust mess. I didn't know what to do with that, so I told her she could come to the reception, only not the ceremony, and only if she stayed away from you unless you agreed otherwise. I stared at her. She also said she wanted 10 minutes with you privately, Celia added. I told her absolutely not unless you initiated it. I let out a slow breath. Thank you. She looked bad, Evie. Not glamorous bad. Life has been eating her bad. That did not move me the way it once might have. It only made the day feel more precariously balanced. And Derek? Celia's mouth tightened. Derek was invited because Noah still sees him occasionally through business contacts, and because Helen asked if leaving him out would create a bigger family scene than including him. I said yes, probably. I'm not proud of that answer. No one knows about me and Graham. He knows enough to keep his mouth shut and act normal. I nodded. Only a small circle knew the full shape of my life by then. My mother knew. Celia knew. Helen knew. A few close friends knew. Graham and I had been engaged for 3 months, but we had chosen not to make a broad announcement yet because Lucy was still settling into the language of it. She had begun calling me Mommy in private about 6 weeks earlier after a nightmare, and we had let the name come when it came, rather than turning it into a ceremony. Children do not need adults to make speeches about love before they know where home is. The ceremony itself passed in a blur of vows on
Where's
Toby's
Deep
lips,
Ink?
and Lucy whispering questions in my ear about whether flower girls got paid. I stood in the second row with her hand in mine and watched Celia marry a kind man from
I'm
Lexington.
guessing it's on
He looked at her
Neptune.
as if he had been relieved rather than dazzled to find her. I liked that. Dazzle is temporary. Relief can build a life. Derek did not attend the ceremony.
Yeah.
Melissa didn't either. But by the time the reception began, and people were filtering into the tent with champagne and shawls, and the first trays of hors d'oeuvres, I saw him near the bar. He had chosen a charcoal suit and a tie the color of expensive red wine. His hair was thinner than it had been when he was at work. There were fine lines around his mouth I did not remember seeing. But he still wore himself with the confidence of a man who believes dreams belong to him. So he entered them smiling. He was with a woman I didn't know, late 30s, maybe glossy black hair, a hand resting too deliberately on his arm. He saw me at the same moment I saw him, and I watched the old instinct settle over his face like a stage light. He kissed the woman's cheek, said something to her, and started across the tent. My mother, seated beside me at table 9, set down her champagne and muttered, "If he embarrasses himself at Celia's wedding, I'm too old to stop myself from helping. Please don't get arrested in silk," I said under my breath. Dismissed. No comment. Derek reached our table with the smooth smooth of a man approaching a former audience, not a former wife. Place I could smell his cologne and the whiskey he had likely started on before the first dance. She glanced at my mother, who looked back at him with all the warmth of a cat side, then fixed her attention on me. "Phoebe," the smile widened. "You look well." There was a time that pause before I would have cut him. That night it only bored him. Derek. He slid one hand into his pocket, adopting the casual posture he used whenever he wanted to imply that I was the one carrying a great emotional threat. I've been meaning to say hello all evening, but I didn't want to intrude. You are including me. That should have warned him off. Instead it sharpened him. "I heard you've been spending a lot of time with my family," he said lightly. My mother made a small disgust with town and reached for her water bottle. "I'm here for Celia," he said.
Kitty, 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 kitty. Are you my kitty? Are you my kitty cat? My kitty cat. My kitty cat.
I touched her wrist under the table before she could stand. I looked at
Are
Derek.
you my kitty?
The need to win rooms.
Huh?
The
Are
inability
you
to
my
leave a
kitty?
woman really wounded when he could try to humiliate her publicly. The
Oh,
childish conviction that if he struck her,
Luna.
he could control the story. I opened my mouth to tell him.
Luna.
Never got the chance.
I love my Luna.
In the children's activity corner at the edge of the dance floor, yellow skirt bouncing around her knees, curls.
Okay, get down.
She threw herself against my soft part of my chair seat, wrapped both arms around my waist, and pressed her cheek to my thigh. "I love you," she announced at full volume, because children do not understand strategic timing. And thank God for that. Miss June gave me 2 cookies, and I only ate one because I'm saving the other for Daddy. The silence around us was immediate and absolute. Derek's face changed first. Not much, just enough. His eyes dropped to Lucy, then lifted to me, then back to Lucy again, with the kind of dawning horror that only comes when a man's vanity collides with arithmetic he did not expect to do in public. He knew Lucy was too old to be his. He knew I had never had children with him. He also knew the child in front of him just called me mommy in a room full of nurses. "Usually," he said. And for the first time all evening there was no performance in sport. Who is this? Lucy, unaware she was detonating a landmine, reached into the pocket of my dress and retrieved the folded cocktail napkin she had hidden there earlier. "This is for Daddy," she said importantly. His head stopped looking behind me. I heard the step before I turned. The quiet measured stride I had come to know over hospital hallways, courthouse corridors, and my own patient at 7 in the morning when he crossed to pour coffee before Lucy woke up. Graham walked into the tent in a dark suit with his tie loosened and his jacket unbuttoned with the October dust at his back. He looked tired in the way only good men with too much on their shoulders ever look tired, contained Lucy. First, then me, then Derek. Lucy twisted in my arms and squealed, "Daddy!" Graham crossed the floor bent and scooped her up with the practiced ease of a man who had done it 1,000 times. She planted the cocktail napkin on his shoulder like a medal. He kissed her hair, then looked at me with that small, private softness I had once thought belonged only to fairy tales and widowers who survived them. "You made it through cocktail hour," he said. "Barely," I said. His hand settled at the back of my chair. The ring on my left hand caught the light. Derek saw it. He saw the ring the child. The way Lucy reached for me, even while balanced on Graham's hip. The way Graham's body had angled toward mine without thought. As if that space beside him already belonged to me. He saw in one merciless instant that the woman he had tried to humiliate at his former in-law's wedding was not alone, not broken, and not standing at the edge of his family anymore. She was inside it. "What the hell is this?" he said. No one answered him, not immediately. And then from the far side of the tent, a woman's voice cut through the
I think
silence.
your sister's
"No,
phone
Derek,"
goes,
Vanessa Cole said. "The better question is
"You
what
be
you did."
quiet."
Vanessa stood near the far edge of the tent, in a slate blue dress that had probably been elegant when she bought it, and now hung on her like a compromise. She had lost weight in the sharp, joyless way
yawn.
life had been sanding them down their heels. Her hair, once the kind of dark shine women in Richmond salons point to in magazines, was thinned back too tight. There were shadows under her eyes I recognized not from sympathy but from the mirror of my own worst months. The look of someone who had not been sleeping because conscience and consequences had finally begun sharing a bed. Every head in the tent turned toward her. Derek still had that half-frozen expression of a man trying to decide which disaster to address.
Well,
First,
she
the
might
fact
be
that
in
his
training
daughterless
today.
ex-wife was now standing beside his brother, while a 4-year-old
Or
called her
overhead.
mommy, or the fact that the woman he once helped destroy her life with had just opened her mouth in public. "Vanessa," he said. And there it was again, that instinctive shift into warning, the same tone he used on interns, waiters, and anyone else he thought he could bully with confidence. "This isn't the place." Vanessa laughed once softly. It wasn't a pleasant sound. "No," she said. "It's exactly the place. You've always liked an audience." Lucy's arms tightened around Graham's neck. I touched her back lightly, and Graham lowered his voice near her ear. "Why don't you take that cookie to Grandma Helen for me?" he murmured. "Then Miss June can show you the dessert table." Lucy looked from his face to mine, sensing enough tension to know something adult was happening, but not enough to understand it. I kissed her temple and nodded. "Go on, sweetheart." Graham set her down. She trotted toward Helen, clutching the napkin-wrapped cookie, and I watched until she reached my former mother-in-law's table before I let myself turn back. Vanessa stepped farther into the open space between the tables. The band had stopped mid-transition. Somewhere behind the bar, a bottle knocked softly against glass. The bride and groom had frozen near the sweetheart table, Celia's hand still wrapped around Noah's wrist. Nobody moved to stop Vanessa. Nobody, I think, knew how. "I'm not here to ruin Celia's wedding," Vanessa said, though her voice trembled enough to betray how much effort it cost her to keep still. "I'm here because 5 years ago I helped ruin someone else's life. And then I spent those same 5 years helping Derek pretend he was just unlucky instead of dishonest." Derek took one step toward her. Graham moved without looking dramatic about it, just enough to place himself half a pace forward, a quiet line in the floor between his brother and everyone else. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Stay where you are." Derek stopped. It struck me then that I had never seen the two of them side by side after all these years, without understanding with perfect clarity why one man built trust and the other owned fear. Derek had always mistaken force for authority. Graham had the kind that didn't require volume. Vanessa looked at me once before continuing. I could not read her expression. Regret, yes. Shame, certainly. But there was something else too, relief maybe, at finally choosing the pain she could survive over the lie she no longer could. The affair was real, she said, and several people flinched at hearing it stated so plainly. It lasted almost 2 years. I told myself it started because Derek understood me, and Evie had outgrown me, and I was tired of being the side character in my own life. Those were the stories I used to keep from admitting the truth, which was ugly. Derek wanted access, and I wanted to be chosen. That's a dangerous combination. My mother sat perfectly still beside me. Celia had gone pale. Helen Mercer had one hand over Lucy's hair and the other pressed against her own throat. Vanessa swallowed. I worked in trust administration. I had access to file structures, account notes, and internal routing. I wasn't supposed to share any of it, obviously, and at first I didn't. Then Derek started asking questions about Helen Mercer's charitable sum account, how distributions were approved, what oversight Graham had, whether temporary reallocations would trigger automatic alerts if they were reversed before the quarterly statement closed. A
Okay,
murmur moved through the
you-
tent like wind
let's
through
go.
dying leaves.
What?
Derek found his voice.
Plant the
This is
trees.
insane. No, Vanessa said.
Seriously?
Yeah.
It was broad. It just
You
happened
promised
in
me.
increments.
No, I did not.
Not gonna take long, Clayton. There's only one fucking tree.
Her clutch and pulled out a
Better
slim
dig a
white
hole
envelope
and put
with
it in
flash
there.
drive on a key ring. Her hand shook.
Then why do you need me?
After Evie found
Dig
us,
the
Derek
hole.
panicked and reversed the first transfer. That's the one she found on the laptop. It wasn't the only one. It wasn't even the worst one.
Put that shovel out of here.
Vanessa's eyes shifted to me. There was another account
advice?
linked through a donor-advised fund Helen's husband set up years ago.
You wanna use
Derek
a
used
bigger shovel or this one?
to move money temporarily to a side account connected to one of his business entities. He told me it was a bridge, that he was going to replace it before anyone saw the statement that no one would lose anything if I just helped him one more time. My stomach went cold. Lydia had suspected there was more. I had suspected there was more. But suspicion and hearing the shape of it out loud are different things. Out loud it acquired weight. Out loud it became a room full of witnesses. How much, Graham asked. Vanessa looked at me. Enough that if the market had dipped at the wrong time or one payment had been delayed, Helen would have noticed. Enough that if Derek hadn't gotten lucky twice, it would have become criminal 5 years ago. Lucky Derek snapped. You were the one with access. Vanessa gave him a look so stripped of affection it almost made him step back. And there it is, she said quietly. That's what he always did. He found the hunger in people and fed it just enough to make them useful. Then, the moment anything cracked, he handed them the bill. She turned back to the room. I'm in a restitution program now because what I did cost me my job, my license, and almost every relationship I had left. I've been working with an ethics counselor and a forensic accountant. Part of making amends meant pulling every record I still had the legal right to provide through counsel. This, she lifted the envelope, contains copies of emails, internal note logs, and transaction records from the second account Derek used. The flash drive contains the same files, plus a voicemail he left me after Evie filed for divorce telling me to keep the story straight, and reminding me that if Helen believed Evie had touched the paperwork first, no one would look too closely at him. For one suspended second, nobody breathed. Then I heard my own voice before I fully felt it. He told Helen I might have touched her trust. Vanessa looked at me and nodded, her face folding with something close to grief. Yes, it was a strange thing the way that hurt landed. Not louder than the affair, not even sharper, just deeper. It slid beneath the old wound and found the place where dignity lives. All those months when Helen's voice had gone cool on the phone. All the invitations that never came. The lunch where she had seemed ashamed but wouldn't say why. Derek had let his own mother suspect me because suspicion was a cheaper shield than honesty. Helen made a sound, then a small wounded inhale and covered her mouth. He said if she thought you were too close to the paperwork because of your job, Vanessa continued, it would explain why you overreacted. He said people would believe you were embarrassed and vindictive after the affair, and that if I kept quiet, the whole thing would settle. Derek's face had gone the color of old paper. You're doing this because you're broke, he said to Vanessa, but the force had gone out of him. You need someone to blame. No, she said. I'm doing it because for 5 years I woke up every morning knowing that the best person in my life had been the one I chose to betray. And the worst man I ever met had convinced me that being loved by him was worth becoming someone I couldn't stand. The tent was silent except for the low rattle of the canvas in the evening wind. Lydia Shaw stepped out from a table near the back, where to my astonishment she had apparently been sitting for most of the reception, with a glass of white wine, and the patience of a woman who knew exactly when her entrance would matter. Celia, I realized, must have invited her the minute Vanessa called. May I? Lydia asked Vanessa, extending a hand toward the envelope and flash drive. Vanessa gave them over. Lydia opened the envelope, scanned the top page, and looked up at Graham. This is enough to reopen the financial side properly, she said. Whether it becomes civil, criminal, or both depends on what the full records show. But yes, this is real. Derek lunged then, not dramatically, not like a movie villain, but with the ugly reflex of a man watching the last wall collapse. He reached for Vanessa's wrist fingers, clamping around the bones hard enough to make her gasp. Take your hand off her, Graham said. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Every conversation in the tent had already died. Derek looked at his brother, and for the first time since I had known him, I saw fear land before anger. He let go, but not before leaving red marks on Vanessa's skin. Noah was beside them a second later. Then two of the venue staff. Then one of Graham's oldest friends from law school, who had apparently been sitting 3 tables over and had the build of a retired linebacker. It took less than 15 seconds for Derek Mercer, who had spent his adult life believing he could talk his way to the center of any room, to find himself being escorted toward the 10th flap, like a man who had finally discovered there are some stories charm cannot outshout. He twisted once at the entrance and looked back at me. You think this means you won? He said. I stood there in my dark green dress, my hands steady at my sides, and realized with complete clarity that I had no interest in answering the question the way my younger self might have. I didn't need him to know whether I felt victorious. I needed him to understand something far more humiliating. This stopped being about winning the day you decided my life was collateral. The only difference now is that everyone else knows it too. He stared at me. Then Noah touched his elbow, the tent flap opened, and Derek was gone. No applause followed. Real life is rarely that tiring. People exhaled. Celia began to cry quietly into Noah's shoulder because it was still her wedding. And there is something especially cruel about family truth choosing your happiest day to become public property. Graham crossed the floor and spoke softly to the band leader, who nodded and guided the musicians toward a slower song, not to erase what had happened, but to give the room somewhere to put its pulse. Vanessa remembered she was looking suddenly smaller without Derek to perform against. I walked to her before I fully decided to. She lifted her chin like she expected me to slap her. I didn't. Why now, I asked. Her eyes filled but did not spill. Because my counselor asked me what the difference was between remorse and self-pity, she said. And I realized I had spent years confusing the two. It wasn't enough to fix anything. It
I don't
wasn't
get
even enough
when
to
you're
forgive.
trying to have
But
them.
it was honest. And I had learned to respect honesty even when it arrived too late to be useful. Helen approached us slowly, Lucy's hand in hers. My former mother-in-law looked 10 years older than she had at lunch in the Jefferson tea room, and somehow more solid too, as if grief had finally burned off the last of her denial. I owe you an apology I should have made years ago, she said to me. I let myself believe weakness where there was appetite. And worse, I let myself doubt the wrong person.
Alright,
I
thank you.
looked at her for a long moment. There are apologies that ask to be absolved, and apologies that merely place
Tree
truth
is
where it
in the
should have been
room.
all along. This was the second time. I know I slipped. It was all I had to give. For once it was enough. Lucy tugged at my hand. Mommy, are you sad? The question broke something open in me, not a wound this time, but the hard shell around her. I knelt so we were eye level. No, sweetheart, I said, smoothing a curl from her cheek. I'm okay. That was true in a way it had not been for a very long time. A few months later, Lydia called to tell me the records Vanessa provided had done exactly what she thought they would. Derek's business accounts were subpoenaed. Helen's advisors filed civil claims. There was talk of criminal exposure tied to wire fraud and fiduciary misconduct. If the numbers lined up the way the preliminary review suggested, Vanessa entered a formal cooperation agreement. I didn't ask for every update after that. There are some endings you don't need to watch frame by frame once the truth has finally chosen its side. I married Graham in a small ceremony the following spring in my mother's garden under the dogwood tree where my father once hung a porch swing. Lucy scattered petals with the solemn concentration of a child performing sacred work.
No.
Celia cried before the vows even started. Helen brought lemon bars and did not mention the wedding tent one. By summer, my townhouse was sold. I moved into Graham's house outside Richmond, where Lucy had already decided my side of the closet needed more shelves, and where the basil plant, against all odds, survived the transition. Life did not become perfect after that. Families rarely do. Lucy still had nights when she missed Claire so badly she cried into my shirt until it was damp at the collar. Graham still carried grief in quiet places. I still had mornings when an old song or a hotel tea room or the smell of Vanessa's perfume on a stranger in a grocery store could catch me off guard. But pain stopped being the center of the story. One evening, almost a year after Celia's wedding, I was standing at the stove making grilled cheese, while Lucy sat at the counter coloring a princess with a judge's gavel, her latest artistic theory about my husband's profession. When she looked up and said with complete ordinary certainty, "Mommy, can I have the yellow crayon back?" Just like that. No fanfare, no tears, no milestone speech. I handed it to her and said, "Only if you promise not to color in Daddy's court club." She grinned, no promises. From the doorway, Graham laughed. Sometimes people ask me, usually after they've heard some version of the story through the family grapevine, whether seeing Derek humiliated at that wedding felt satisfying. The honest answer is yes, but not for the reasons they expect. It wasn't satisfying because he suffered. It was satisfying because the room finally saw what I had carried alone. Because the lie I had once been asked to live inside could no longer survive daylight. Because 5 years after Derek looked me in the eye and told me leaving me was the best decision he ever made, he had to stand in the middle of a life I rebuilt without him, and watch every important thing choose me anyway. If you've ever had to leave quietly while someone louder rewrote the story, I hope you remember this silence is not surrender. Time is not defeat. And the truth has a patient way of finding the room where it belongs. If this story stayed with you, I'd love to hear from you. Tell me in the comments where you're listening from, or whether you've ever had to rebuild after someone thought they'd broken you for good. We share stories like this every day. Stories about betrayal, second chances, family, and the kind of strength that doesn't always look dramatic from the outside. So if you want more, subscribe and stay with us. There are a lot of journeys left to take together. My husband smiled when the K9 lunged toward our luggage. It wasn't a big smile. Grant Harper was too controlled for that. It was just a tiny upward pull at one corner of his mouth, the kind of expression most people would miss, unless they had spent 18 years watching him charm investors, lie to colleagues, and look straight into my eyes while telling me I was imagining things. But I saw it. I saw the flicker of anticipation in his face, the pulse jumping in his jaw, the way his hand tightened around the handle of his carry-on as the German Shepherd moved closer to the conveyor.
Why'd you leave the fucking door open?
I didn't.
You did too.
No, don't close that one. Put some bug spray on. It's right here.
Me in handcuffs, him breathing in public, and his mistress free to step into my life while I disappeared behind a steel door somewhere far from home. What Grant didn't know was that I had already changed his script.
Hey, cut it out.
The locked case was no longer.
You cut it out.
Putting bug spray on you.
The first thing I noticed when we walked
Where's your legs?
in the security line at O'Hare was the smell of roasted coffee and floor polish. Airports always smell like people trying to pretend they aren't afraid to leave their lives behind for a few days. It was 6:40 in the morning,
There.
and the terminal glowed with that cold, expensive light that makes everyone look either exhausted or dishonest. In Grant's case, it was both. I stood beside him, holding a paper cup of vanilla latte, my black cashmere coat folded over one arm, and watched him glance at my suitcase for the fifth time in less than 2 minutes. "Relax," he said too casually. "We're running ahead of schedule." His voice was warm, almost playful. To anyone else, he looked like a successful husband taking his wife on a luxury getaway. At 49, Grant still knew how to wear concern like a custom suit. He had silver at his temples, broad shoulders, a polished executive smile, and the kind of easy confidence that made strangers trust him in elevators. It had made me trust him once too. I took a slow sip of coffee and smiled back. "I'm perfectly relaxed." "Good." He leaned in and kissed my cheek. "That's all I want this week. No stress, just you and me." You and me, right. And apparently Lila Bennett in a cream wool trench coat and $600 worth of highlights, standing 10 feet behind us, pretending she wasn't on the same flight. Lila lifted a hand in a bright little wave when our eyes met, then immediately looked embarrassed by her own boldness. She had perfected that expression over the last year, half innocent, half flirtatious, all performance. At 31, she had mastered the art of looking expensive without ever appearing to try. Her blonde hair fell in glossy waves over one shoulder. Her nails were pale pink and immaculate. The cream leather weekender at her feet had a designer logo stamped so prominently across it, it might as well have been shouting. Grant had introduced her to me 2 years earlier at a company Christmas party as his new executive assistant. She'd shaken my hand with both of hers and told me how much she admired my work. 3 months later, she was sending Grant texts after midnight. 6 months after that, she was wearing earrings that cost more than my first car. And now she was flying to London on the same itinerary as the romantic trip my husband had booked to save our marriage. The lie would have been insulting if it hadn't been so dangerous.
Oh, don't we have to get a hold of Direct Energy?
Confidential financial projections to a board member during our layover.
Or is it APCO that called this morning first?
He said it with a straight face, as if encrypted
Hello?
email didn't exist, as if a billion-dollar pharmaceutical
ADCO.
company depended
I
on
mean,
his mistress carrying
both.
documents across the Atlantic.
Yeah.
Like
We
it
have
was
phone both, but they
1987.
probably got a phone
At the time,
APCO
I had
first.
smiled and told him I understood. I had not understood. I had calculated. Go ahead and put your bag up first, Grant said, now resting a hand on the small of my back. Then I'll put mine up behind it. There it was again. The urgency under the softness. The tiny pressure forward. He wanted my suitcase on that belt. He wanted it separated from the others, just enough to be clearly mine when the alarm went off. I let him guide me half a step, then lifted the handle of my suitcase myself. It was a sleek black rig and rider carrier with practical understated, and until last night entirely unremarkable. I set it on the belt with careful ease directly beside Grant's garment bag. Lila stepped up behind us and placed her cream leather weekender on the belt too. She smelled like amber and orange blossom. Her eyes slid toward Grant for a second, searching his face for reassurance, then away again. Whatever role she thought she was playing in this little drama, she clearly believed she was on the winning side. That almost made me pity her. Almost. The line inched forward. Somewhere behind us, a toddler started crying. An overhead speaker called final boarding for a flight to Denver. A TSA agent waved an elderly couple through the scanner with the kind of tired politeness only airports and hospitals ever manage. Then the atmosphere shifted. A customs officer walked into our lane with a German shepherd at his side. The dog was lean and focused, black and tan fur gleaming beneath the fluorescent lights. It moved with controlled purpose, nose, low tail steady. The moment I saw it, I felt Grant go still beside me. Not visibly still, he wasn't sloppy enough for that. But I felt it in the way his body tightened, the way his breathing paused, the way excitement sharpened the air around him. Last night around 2 in the morning, I had watched him slide out of bed and stand over my suitcase in the dark. I had kept my breathing, even my eyes barely open beneath lowered lashes, while he knelt on the bedroom rug and unzipped the inner lining. He used a utility blade to cut a clean slit in the fabric, then slid a small locked metal case into the frame of the luggage with careful, practiced hands. He smoothed the lining back into place, zipped the compartment, and patted the suitcase once, like a man sealing a deal. Then he went back to bed and slept beautifully. What he didn't know was that I had gotten up 20 minutes later, removed the case, opened it in my home office, and learned exactly what kind of husband I had really married. The memory flickered through me now, sharp as cold water. Evelyn Grant's voice was light, affectionate. You okay? I turned to him with a pleasant smile. Of course. The K9 began working its way down the line, sniffing roller bags and briefcases, weaving between tired travelers and chrome stanchions. My suitcase disappeared into the X-ray tunnel. Grant's eyes followed it so intently I was surprised the officers didn't notice. I stepped through the body scanner, lifted my arms, and waited. No alarm. The machine remained silent. On the other side, I picked up my shoes and coat and watched the conveyor belt emerge. My suitcase rolled out first. The TSA officer glanced at the monitor, then at the bag, then waved it through without a second look. I reached for the handle and pulled it off the rollers. Beside me, Grant stopped breathing. It was subtle, but I saw it, the instant confusion. The flash of disbelief, the way all the blood seemed to leave his face before he forced it back under control. He stared at the bag in my hand as if he were looking at a ghost. The case was supposed to be inside it. The dog was supposed to alert. Security was supposed to pull me aside. That was the whole point. I met his eyes and smiled as if nothing in the world were wrong. Then the German shepherd walked right past me. It ignored Grant's garment bag. It ignored the businessman ahead of us. It ignored the stroller parked near the wall and the pile of backpacks by the secondary screening table. It went straight to Lila's cream leather weekender and sat down hard beside her. The handler's expression changed instantly. Positive alert. Lila blinked. Excuse me. Everything happened at once. Two officers moved in from the adjacent lane. Another agent pulled the bag off the rollers and placed it on the inspection table. Lila gave a brittle laugh and looked at Grant. There has to be some mistake, she said. That's my bag. Yes, ma'am, the officer replied. Step to the side, please. Grant didn't move. He looked at Lila's bag the way a man looks at a burning building when he knows exactly what's inside. I leaned one shoulder against the metal divider and took another sip of my coffee. It had gone lukewarm, but the sweetness still cut through the metallic smell of airport air. Lila's mouth tightened. Grant. He turned to her too slowly. That was when I saw it, the first crack in his composure. The first raw flash of fear he couldn't smooth away. He looked at the cream leather bag, then at me, and for one brief, glorious second, my husband understood that I had touched every piece on the board, while he was busy congratulating himself on the checkmate. The officer unzipped Lila's bag and reached inside. Grant went pale on the spot. 3 months earlier, on a rainy Tuesday in October, I stood in my kitchen staring at a charge for $984 at a boutique hotel downtown, and tried to decide whether I was still married to a liar or slowly becoming one of those women who invent betrayals because they can't bear ordinary disappointment. The rain tapped against the windows in soft, relentless bursts. My kitchen smelled like basil garlic and the tomato sauce I'd left simmering too long while I refreshed our banking app for the 4th time. The charge had appeared on our shared credit card statement at 4:12 p.m. I knew the exact time because I had been waiting for a client to join a Zoom call when the fraud alert popped up on my phone. The hotel wasn't one Grant used for work. It wasn't even in the part of Chicago where his company usually hosted conferences. It was intimate, expensive, and discreet, the kind of place people booked when they didn't want to be seen walking through a lobby. I heard the front door open and close, followed by the familiar thud of Grant's leather shoes in the hallway. Ed, he called. You home? I set my phone face down on the marble island and forced my shoulders to relax. In the kitchen, Grant walked in carrying the cold, wet snow of the city with him. He shrugged out of his navy overcoat, loosened his tie, and gave me the same smile that had once made me feel chosen. Something smells amazing. Chicken parmesan, I said. He came over and kissed my cheek. You spoiled me. The words were easy. Too easy. I watched him set his briefcase on a chair, roll up his sleeves, and pour himself sparkling water in the fridge as if nothing in the world had shifted. I picked up my phone and turned the screen toward him. What's this charge? He glanced down. Just one glance. Not enough for an innocent man trying to remember a transaction. Then he took a sip of water and frowned mildly, as if I had shown him a typo in grocery list. What charge? The Lancer House. 984 this afternoon. Grant set the glass down with careful precision. That's not possible. It's on the statement. He reached for the phone and studied it for 2 seconds, then handed it back. It's strange. My pulse started ticking harder at the base of my throat. So you didn't stay there? No, he gave a small laugh, almost affectionate. Evelyn, I was in a budget review from noon until 5. Ask anyone. Then why is it on our card? He leaned both palms against the island and looked at me with a kind of patient concern that made my skin tighten. You probably clicked into a pending authorization from something else. No, I didn't. You've had a brutal month, he said softly. You're exhausted, Ed. You're not thinking straight. There it was. At the time, it was just a sentence. A husband telling his overworked wife to slow down. I didn't know it would become the refrain of that winter, the thread he would weave through every room in our house, until I could hear it even when he wasn't speaking. I laughed, but there wasn't much humor in it. I'm perfectly capable of reading a credit card statement. I know you are. He reached for my wrist and squeezed lightly. I'm saying you've been under a lot of pressure. Maybe don't jump straight to a conspiracy because of one weird charge. The sauce behind me bubbled too hard. Somewhere in the living room, the dryer buzzed to signal the end of a cycle. I remember these details because the moment itself felt so normal that I nearly let it go. That was Grant's gift. He knew how to wrap cruelty inside reason. I took my hand back and turned off the stove. Fine, then explain it when you can. Of course. He kissed the top of my head. And for the record, if I ever did book a boutique, I had better taste. I smiled because he expected me to. Then I served dinner. That night after he fell asleep, I checked the statement again. The charge was gone. Not pending, not reversed, gone. I sat on the edge of our bed in the dark with my phone in my hand. The screen lighting the room blue-white. and felt something cold slip under my ribs. I knew what I had seen. I had spent 20 years untangling corporate fraud tracing hidden assets through shell accounts and watching men in expensive suits swear under oath that numbers didn't mean what they plainly meant. I did not misread bank records. Still, over the next few weeks, Grant made me question things I had never questioned before. I would mention a dinner he promised we'd attend, and he'd blink at me and say, "We never had that conversation." I would leave my keys on the entry table and find them later in the downstairs powder room cabinet. I would ask why he changed his phone passcode after 16 years of using the same one, and he would sigh, rub his forehead, and say, "Ev, you're doing it again." Doing what again? Making him feel monitored, making everything into an interrogation, looking for hidden meaning where none existed. "You're exhausted," he would say. "You're not thinking straight." The phrase became his favorite instrument. He used it with a low, intimate gentleness that made it sound like concern instead of contempt. If I asked why he was suddenly spending 3 nights a week at client dinners, I wasn't thinking straight. If I pointed out that he had started showering the second he got home, I wasn't thinking straight. If I mentioned the perfume on his jacket, a warm floral scent that was not mine, he would take my face in his hands, kiss my forehead, and ask whether I wanted him to help me find a therapist. It should have enraged me. Instead, first it hollowed me out. I was 46, not 26. I had spent my adult life building a reputation for precision discipline and professional calm. I advised companies on internal corruption. I sat across from CFOs and compliance boards and told them where the bodies were buried in their books. I was not impulsive. I was not dramatic. But there is something uniquely destabilizing about living with someone who keeps nudging your reality half an inch to the left every day, and then smiling when you lose your footing. By early November, I was sleeping badly and checking things twice. I started taking screenshots of statements. I photographed where I left my keys. I wrote down conversations after they happened, not because I was building a case against my husband, not yet, but because I needed proof that my own memory still belonged to me. The thing that finally snapped me out of it wasn't romantic. It wasn't lipstick on a collar or a hotel selfie or a guilty text lighting up on his phone. It was a receipt in the pocket of his charcoal suit. I found it on a Sunday morning while sorting dry cleaning. Grant was in the shower. I reached into his breast pocket and pulled out a folded slip from Bellamy Jewelers on Oak Street. At the bottom was a charge for $14,600, one diamond bracelet, custom set and gift wrapped. I stared at the number until it blurred. My birthday had been in August. Our anniversary was in June. Christmas was still weeks away, and Grant had never once in his life spent $14,000 on me without first making a speech about fiscal responsibility. When he came downstairs toweling his hair, I was sitting at the breakfast nook with the receipt laid flat on the table between us. He stopped when he saw it. Not dramatically, just a tiny hitch in his stride. "What's that?" he asked. "You tell me." He glanced down and smiled in disbelief as if I had pulled a rabbit out of his pocket. "Oh, that." He pulled out the chair across from me and sat down. "It's a corporate gift. One of our investors just closed a major deal. His wife had a birthday. Bellamy Gift Wraps investor presents now. It was last minute. I held his arm. Do you want to try that again?" Something hard flickered behind his smile, gone so fast I might have missed it if I weren't looking for it. Then he leaned back and crossed his arms. "What exactly are you accusing me of?" "I'm asking why you bought a $14,000 bracelet and hid the receipt in your suit. You weren't supposed to be going through my pocket." The deflection landed like a slap. I let the silence stretch. Rain ticked against the breakfast nook windows. Somewhere upstairs, the shower fan was still running. Grant's jaw tightened. Then he gave me the look again, that soft, sorrowful look of a man married to someone unstable. "Evelyn," he said quietly, "I'm worried about you." I didn't answer. He exhaled and reached for my hand. I moved it before he could touch me. "I know your work has been intense," he continued. "I know you've been carrying too much. But this isn't healthy. You think I'm imagining a jewelry receipt too? I think you're spiraling." There it was again. Not thinking straight. Spiraling. Exhausted. Unwell. All carefully chosen words, each one polished smooth by repetition. He wanted me defensive. He wanted me explaining myself instead of examining him. So I stopped. I stood, folded the receipt, and slipped it into the pocket of my robe. "Dinner's with your mother on Thursday, right?" Grant blinked, caught off guard by the pivot. "Yes." don't be late. I walked out of the kitchen before he could answer. That afternoon, while he watched football in the den and assumed the conversation was over, I sat in my office with the receipt under my desk lamp and typed Bellamy Jewelers into a search bar. Their site featured a private appointment service, custom bridal pieces, and a winter charity gala. I almost closed the page. Then I saw a photo from a fundraising event 3 weeks earlier. Grant stood near the back of the frame in a tuxedo drink in hand, smiling down at a blonde woman in a black silk dress. Lila Bennett was wearing a diamond bracelet I had never seen before. By midnight, I wasn't looking at an affair anymore. I was looking at a cover-up. Once I saw the bracelet on Lila's wrist, I stopped asking whether Grant was cheating and started asking a much more useful question: how much of our life had become fear? The answer, as it turned out, was almost all of it. I spent the next 2 weeks doing what I should have done the moment that hotel charge vanished from our statement. I shut up, smiled, and started collecting evidence. Grant had spent the better part of a year trying to convince me I was too tired, too suspicious, too
I'm gonna try
emotional
to
to trust my own
plan and
instincts.
see what happens.
Fine. I let him believe it had worked. I let him believe his favorite line: "You're exhausted, Ed. You're not thinking straight," had finally sunk deep enough to keep me off balance. Meanwhile, I became very, very quiet. Grant interpreted silence as surrender. That was his first real mistake. I work in forensic compliance, which sounds dry until you understand what it actually means. My job is to look at numbers. People are desperate to hide and ask them questions until they start bleeding. I've spent years tracing embezzlement through shell vendors, catching executives who used corporate expense accounts like private slush funds, and watching men with perfect teeth swear their books were clean while I held the printout that proved otherwise. Grant knew exactly what I did for a living. He just thought marriage had made me soft. So I approached him the way I would have approached any executive I suspected of fraud. No accusations, no grand confrontation, no righteous speeches. I started with patterns. Grant had always been careful with his devices, but suddenly he became absurdly careful. He started taking work calls in the garage. He angled his phone away from me at dinner. He changed the family cloud password and claimed IT had forced the update. His schedule also developed odd pockets of vagueness, 2-hour vendor lunches that stretched into 6 board prep meetings. On days there were no board members in town, overnight strategy sessions at hotels close enough to drive home from, but apparently too important to leave. I built a timeline in a spreadsheet because I needed structure more than I needed sleep. On one tab, I listed his calendar plans. On another, I listed credit card charges, tollway records, car service receipts, and restaurant reservations. Then I cross-referenced them against public corporate filings, investor schedules, and conference dates for Halcyon Biotech, the pharmaceutical company, where Grant had been climbing the executive ladder for the last 12 years. The inconsistencies appeared faster than I expected. One vendor dinner happened on a night the vendor's CEO was in Seattle, not Chicago. A late finance review coincided with a reservation for 2 at a Michelin-starred restaurant in River North. A board breakfast had been expensed to Halcyon as a compliance retreat, but the invoice included a spa service and a champagne add-on. The receipts were sloppy in the way arrogant people get sloppy when no one has challenged them in a while. Then the numbers started to get stranger. There were consulting payments routed to a company called Norel Advisory Group. Small enough at first to look harmless, 15,000 here, 22,000 there, always under the threshold that would trigger automatic internal review. But Norel didn't have a website, a staff page, or any visible business footprint. Its registered address belonged to a UPS store in Naperville. When I dug into state filings, I found a manager listed as L. Bennett. I stared at the screen for a long time. Lila wasn't just sleeping with my husband. She was tied to a shell vendor receiving money from his company. I pulled up Halcyon's vendor payment history through a source I'm not going to name because I'd like to keep my professional license. By the end of that night, I had 3 more entities linked to the same post office box, all receiving recurring payments approved by one executive sign-off, Grant Harper. My chest went cold. Affairs are humiliating. Fraud is something else. Fraud has structure. Fraud has appetite. Fraud means the person lying to your face over dinner isn't just selfish.
There are any
He's running a
additional
parallel life with its own
luxuries
bookkeeping, its own
originally.
contingencies, its own escape routes. It means the flowers on your kitchen island and the hand on your back and the murmured, You okay, honey? Aren't just manipulative. They're operational. By the time Grant came home that Thursday night, I had enough to know he was siphoning money out of Halcyon through fake vendors inflating project expenses and redirecting funds through companies that either belonged to Lila or were being managed on her behalf. I didn't yet know how much money was missing, but it was already well beyond a fair gift territory. We were in felony territory now. I was standing at the stove browning shallots when he walked in. He kissed my cheek, set down his keys, and said, "You look nice." I had changed into a cream sweater and gold hoops because I wanted to see if he'd mistake composure for ignorance. "Thanks," I said. "How's your day?" He loosened his tie. "Long. Finance is a service." I nearly laughed. "Poor thing," I said instead. At dinner, he told me a story about a difficult board member and made me a second glass of wine. He asked whether I wanted to take a trip after Thanksgiving, just the two of us, somewhere warm, somewhere quiet, somewhere we could reset. He used that word carefully, like he'd rehearsed it. Reset. As if the problem in our marriage was static. As if all we needed was ocean air and room service and a week away from my tendency to notice them, where I asked. He cut into his sandwich. Maybe London for a few days first, then the Maldives. I looked up. London. There's a board meeting there I can't move, he said. But after that, we have 10 days to ourselves. To ourselves. There it was again. I took a sip of wine and watched him over the rim of the glass. "That sounds expensive." I smiled. I can afford to spoil my wife. It was such a polished line, such a generous line, and I might have believed it once. But I knew too much now. I knew about Morel Advisory. I knew about the bracelet. I knew his late nights had accounting trails. The trip wasn't an apology. It was logistics. "Who's going to the board meeting?" I asked. "Just me and a few finance people." Lila. His knife paused for half a second against the plate. "Probably. She handles a lot of the prep." "Of course she did." I set down my fork. "So your assistant is flying to London with us on our romantic reset." Grant gave me a tired smile, the kind men reserve for women they want to make feel unreasonable. "She'll be on the first leg, yes. Then she'll handle the handoff and fly back. It's not a vacation for her." I let it be
Disappear
clear.
until June.
Only
Build your
if you
vacation body
He said
tomorrow
it
morning.
lightly, but the
We're
edge
starting
underneath
the
was
principal
unmistakable.
Tai Chi
Then
Chin.
he softened his voice. "I'm trying here. I'm trying to fix things between us." There was something almost impressive about the way he could weaponize tenderness. He had learned that anger made me sharper, but concern made me hesitate. Concern made me wonder whether I was becoming one of those women who destroy their own peace because they refuse to let go of a suspicion. He'd been working that angle for months, only now it wasn't working. Because when he said
When my
fix
daughter
things
handed me
between
a
us all,
printed
I
piece of
heard
paper
was,
and called it my new
"Move the
fitness
problem out
tracker.
of the
This is
concept."
day one
I
of my
didn't
Tai Chi
answer
Chair
right
plan.
away.
Hope it's worth it.
Instead, I looked
This
down
is
at my
me on
plate,
day
ate a piece of
28.
salmon through the lemon butter, and thought about international airports, about customs checkpoints and foreign jurisdictions, and how easy it would be to trap someone in transit who wanted maximum confusion and minimum control. A wife carrying contraband through a connecting airport, a husband with a polished public image, an assistant ready to confirm that the wife had been acting erratic for months. I felt a shade of the plan before I saw the details. Grant watched me carefully. "Say something." I lifted my gaze. "I'm thinking about whether I want to spend 10 days on an island with a man who keeps pretending I'm stupid." His expression changed just slightly. Not guilt, irritation. Then he reached across the table and covered my hand with his. "You're not stupid. You're timid. You're hurt. And tired. And looking for patterns that aren't there." I almost pulled my hand away, but I forced myself to stay still. "Patterns like your assistant wearing a $14,000 bracelet you bought. That got me a blink. Only one, but I saw it." "Where did you hear them?" he asked. He leaned back in his chair and exhaled through his nose as if I were exhausted. "It wasn't for her. No, it was for a donor event auction. Lila tried it on at the fitting because she was helping coordinate. This is exactly what I mean. You take one image, one moment, and turn it into a whole narrative." I smiled at him then. A small, even smile. "You're right. That does sound like me." Grant relaxed instantly. There it was again, mistake number 2. He heard surrender where there was only stillness. Over the next several days, I built out the rest of the financial picture. The money trail was worse than I thought. Grant had approved fake consulting contracts, added reimbursement reports, and pushed funds through shell entities connected to Lila, and at least one offshore holding company. The total was already over $2 million, maybe more. I hadn't yet untangled all of it, but I knew enough to understand that this wasn't reckless spending or hidden with perks. It was a system, and systems require contingency plans. The trip to London was in 11 days. I told Dana Reed, my oldest friend, and one of the only people on earth who knew the difference between my calm face and my calm face when I was about to dismantle someone just enough to keep me awake. We met for coffee in a quiet hotel lounge near her office. Dana was a trauma nurse with a dry sense of humor and a zero tolerance policy for male nonsense. She listened without interrupting, her fingers wrapped around a cappuccino mug, her dark curls pinned up in the loose, practical way women in impossible jobs wear their hair. So let me get this straight, she said when I finished. Your husband is cheating on you with his assistant stealing from his company, and now wants to take you overseas. Yes. And he spent months trying to make you think you're unstable. Yes. Dana sat back and stared at me for a long moment. Evelyn, I need you to hear how bad that sounds when someone else says it out loud. I do hear it. No, I mean really hear it. She lowered her voice. This isn't just cheating. This is set-up behavior. I looked at the phone collapsing in my untouched latte. She studied me. What are you going to do? I thought about the show companies, about Grant's carefully edited concern, about Lila's bracelet catching the ballroom lights while my husband smiled at her, as if he'd already traded in his life for a shinier version. Then I thought about airports customs and the very specific terror on Grant's face if his plan ever boomeranged back toward me. I'm going to let him make his move, I said. His eyes narrowed. That sounds like the kind of sentence people say right before they end up on Dateline. I smiled despite myself. I'm not going to do anything reckless. That is not a reassuring smile. I know what I'm doing. Do you? I held her gaze. Yes, the truth was by then I did. I no longer believed Grant wanted a romantic reset. I no longer believed the trip was about repairing anything. I believed he needed me somewhere unfamiliar, controllable, and far enough from home that a simple discovery in my luggage could destroy me before I understood what was happening. So I made a decision. I would give him the opportunity. I would pack exactly the suitcase he expected me to pack. I would leave it where he could reach it. I would act wounded, distracted, exhausted, everything he'd spent months insisting I was. And if Grant wanted to use my luggage to bury me, I was going to let him. I just needed to see what he was desperate enough to hide inside it. The night before our flight, I packed exactly the version of myself Grant expected. I moved slowly through our bedroom, folding silk blouses and neutral cashmere into my carry-on, with the distracted care of a woman trying to save a marriage she no longer understood. I set out the passport papers he bought me for our 10th anniversary, the one embossed with my initials in gold. I packed the pearl earrings my mother gave me when I turned 40. I even placed the little bottle of lavender sweet spray in the outer pocket. Because Grant knew I used it in the past. Every choice mattered. Every detail was there. Grant watched me from the doorway while loosening his tie. You're overpacking, he said. I glanced up and smiled faintly. It's Europe in November. I like options. He stepped into the room and set his briefcase on the bench at the foot of our bed. We're only in London one night. And then the Maldives, I said. Assuming paradise still requires sweaters on the weather. He laughed, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. That's my girl. My girl. I used to love her. Hearing our marriage made me feel chosen, claimed in the safe and intimate sense of the word. We are at a place where this time I realized Grant used it most often when he wanted me a girl. My girl right before he redirected the conversation. My girl right before he dismissed her concerns. My girl right before he patted my hand and explained reality back to me in smaller words. I reached the inner compartment of the suitcase and rested both hands on the handle. We are at a place where this horse is a... Car gets here at 6. He crossed the room and kissed my forehead. Try to get some sleep tonight, I said. You look worn out already. I turned my face slightly so his lips brushed my hair instead of my skin. I'll be fine. You say that. His hand lingered at my waist. But you've been somewhere else lately. The irony of a man planning to destroy me, asking where my mind had been, almost made me laugh. Instead, I let my shoulders slide the way he seemed to want to. I'm tired, Grant. That's all. His expression softened when he needed to leave. He thought that the tea was surrender. He thought if I looked worn down down enough, it meant his months of pressure had finally done their work. He squeezed my shoulder once. Get some rest. I have a few emails to send. I watched him leave the room, then looked at the suitcase sitting by the dresser in a square of worn metal. Black hard shell frame, tan leather handle, green material. I stayed waiting for the final prop. I brushed my fingertips over the zipper and went to wash my face. By 11:30, the house had gone quiet. The November wind rattled lightly against the bedroom windows. Grant slept on his back, one arm thrown above his head, breathing with the deep, careless rhythm of a man convinced tomorrow belongs to him. I lay beside him in the dark, wearing a silk sleeve set and a pulse that refused to settle. The digital clock on my nightstand glowed 1:57, then 2:03, then 2:07. At 2:11, Grant moved. I kept my breathing slow, even eyes closed beneath lowered lashes. The mattress shifted as he slid out of bed. I heard the soft pad of his feet against the rug, then the almost silent click of the bathroom door opened. A second later, the room filled with a thin blade of light from the hallway instead. Not the bathroom then, the suitcase. He stood there for a moment listening. I let my mouth fall slightly open the way it does when I'm truly asleep. My right hand remained loose against the sheet. My heartbeat thudded so hard I was certain he could hear it. Grant knelt beside the suitcase. Even in the dim light from the hallway, I could make out the shape of him opening the front compartment with slow, precise movements. Metal whispered softly against metal. Then came a sound I had not expected but recognized instantly once I heard it. The delicate scrape of a utility blade sliding through fabric. He was cutting into the suitcase lining. I felt a strange stillness settle over me. Not fear, not exactly. It was something colder and cleaner than fear, the emotional equivalent of glass. Months of suspicion, humiliation, and doubt narrowed into a single undeniable fact. In the dark, my husband was not improvised. He had done something like this before, or at least rehearsed it enough in his head that his hands moved without hesitation. The slicing stopped. I heard a soft metallic weight being eased into place. Then the zipper closed. Another pause. The rustle of fabric on his chest. He remained beside the bed for several seconds, and I knew he was looking at me, checking for any sign that I'd woken up. I gave him none. At last he slipped back under the covers, warm and familiar and
Hey,
moist.
we got a printer table. Did you put it on yet?
What?
Printer table.
No. What is it?
Where did you put it?
Still in the bag, everybody.
Where's the bag?
I was using the kitchen.
Unlocked the door behind me. Under the dustbin, the damage was easy to find. Grant had cut a neat slit into the inner lining where the frame
Look.
then smoothed the fabric back into place so it would disappear at a glance.
Did you have it unlocked, dear?
I reached inside.
No, but it says if we can hit print, then you can hit this, and maybe we can have it. I always start doing the exercise.
With a biometric latch plate and a backup key slot. Heavy for its size. Purposefully anonymous. No logo, no label. Just a sealed object hidden inside my luggage by the man I had shared a bed with for nearly 2 decades. I set it on the desk and stared at it for a moment. Then I opened a drawer, took out a compact toolkit I usually reserved for computer hardware, and got to work. People like Grant mistake calm women for passive women. They assume composure means softness, that if you don't raise your voice, you must not know how to
Oh,
breathe.
I need you to get that other
What
box
they
of
never
granola
understand
down
is
for
that
me.
some of us learn to stay quiet because it lets us feel the machinery underneath the law.
Do you want
The
some?
biometric latch would have required a registered
No,
fingerprint, but the backup key slot was more old-fashioned than he probably realized. I used a thin tension wrench toothpicks, and the same patience I once used to crack open a locked filing cabinet during a fraud investigation in St. Louis. It took 12 minutes. When the latch clicked, the sound was so small it almost felt insulting. I lifted the lid. Inside were 2 items. The first was a vacuum-sealed pouch containing several smaller packets of white powder, each professionally wrapped and labeled with a colorful shorthand I didn't recognize but didn't need to. It was either narcotics or something close enough to narcotics to ruin a life before anyone else. I sat very still. The room around me narrowed to the lamp glow, the ticking of the wall clock, and the open case on my desk. My mouth had gone dry. I reached for the drive first, because because I needed to understand the shape of the trap before I decided how to survive it. My laptop comes to life. The drive mounted almost immediately. What I found on it was so methodical, so cruelly complete, that for one wild second I had to press my palm flat against the desk to keep from standing up and screaming. There were spreadsheets, dozens of them, showing transfers from Halcyon accounts into shell vendors I had already identified, along with internal memos, forged authorization trails, and expense approvals bearing digital signatures that looked very much like mine. My name appeared on draft consulting agreements I had never seen. There were copied email chains designed to suggest I had advised Grant privately on moving money off book for tax strategy. There was even a scanned note in a font meant to imitate my handwriting discussing temporary asset concealment. Grant wasn't just planning to get me detained at an airport. He was planning to hand investigators a complete narrative in which I was the architect. The contraband would make me dangerous. The flash drive would make me guilty. And Grant, the grieving husband of a forensic consultant who had apparently cracked under pressure, would become the man left behind to answer questions with wounded dignity while keeping the money. I closed my eyes. Not because I was overwhelmed, though I was. Not because I needed a moment, though I did. I closed them because anger, if you let it come too early, can make you clumsy. And I could not afford clumsy. When I opened them again, I copied everything from the drive to an encrypted external backup, then to a secure cloud folder under a name Grant would never think to search. After that, I photographed the contents of the case, the slit in the suitcase liner, and the case itself from every angle. I sent a time-stamped package of evidence to an email account only Dana knew existed. In the subject line, I wrote one sentence: "If anything happens to me, open this immediately." Then I sat back and thought, calling the police right then would have been emotionally satisfying and strategically foolish. Grant would deny everything. He claimed he had no idea where the case came from, that I'd been unstable for months, that the files on the drive were part of some obsessive private project of mine. He had already spent too long laying that groundwork. Maybe I would still win eventually, but only after he had time to move assets, warn Lila, and destroy anything I hadn't found yet. No, if I wanted the truth to survive him, I needed him to prime. I looked at the locked case again, then at my reflection in the dark office window. 46 years old, barefoot, silk pajamas. A marriage collapsing in silence around me. And suddenly, very clearly, I knew what I was going to do. Lila had insisted on joining us at the airport hotel before the flight because, according to Grant, her morning briefing materials required an early handover. That meant there would be luggage clustered in the same suite, the same car service, the same premium check-in room. Grant had chosen proximity because he thought it gave him control. What it actually gave me was access. By dawn, I had resealed the case, repaired the suitcase lining well enough to survive a quick inspection, and repacked everything exactly as Grant expected to find it. Then I tucked the metal case into a garment sleeve inside my
The while since I had Doritos.
down beside my sleeping husband.
What?
It's been a while since I had Doritos.
Grant stretched, smiled, and kissed my shoulder. "Morning, beautiful." I smiled back. By the time we reached the airport, the locked case was no longer in my suitcase. It was waiting in Lila Bennett's cream leather weekender, and as the TSA officer reached for the hidden compartment in her bag, Grant made the smallest sound I had ever heard from a man watching his future die. The first thing Lila did when the TSA officer unzipped her bag, it wasn't a genuine laugh. It was the thin, brittle sound people make when they're still trying to force a situation back into something manageable. She pressed one manicured hand to her chest and looked around as if she expected the room to agree that this was all absurd, some little mix-up that would be fixed with an apology and a smile. "There has to be some mistake," she said. "That bag has been with me the whole time." The officer didn't look up. "Step back, ma'am." Grant moved, then one step forward, then a stop so abrupt it looked painful. He caught himself mid-motion as if his body had started to obey a command his face was still trying to deny. The second agent shifted subtly to block his line to the table. I stood a few feet away with my coat draped over one arm, and my coffee cooling in my hand. I watched my husband try to calculate whether involvement or distance would save him faster. The answer I could see from his eyes was neither. The officer reached into the side compartment of Lila's weekender and frowned. "Sir, I'm going to need another table." Lila's head snapped toward him. "Why?" He didn't answer. He lifted out the case with both hands, matte gray and heavy its edges catching the fluorescent light. Grant's face melted. "Not pale, not tightened, empty. Every practiced expression he'd ever worn, charm concern, mild amusement, patient disappointment, fell away at once, leaving something naked and ugly underneath. He knew that face. He knew exactly how it had gotten there. And for one disorienting second, he looked like a man seeing the laws of physics fail in public. Lila looked from the case to Grant and back again. What is that? No one answered. The officer set the case on the inspection table. Another agent stepped beside him, gloved hands already reaching for a testing kit. Who packed this bag? He asked. I did, Lila said quickly. I mean, yes, me, but I don't know what that is. I've never seen that in my life. Have you been separated from your luggage at any point this morning? No, then too fast. Well, I mean, maybe at the hotel for a second, but not really Grant. She said his name the way someone says doctor after a car crash, as if authority itself might stop the bleeding. Grant finally found his voice. Officer, there must be some kind of misunderstanding. We're all traveling together. Maybe a bad man mishandled a check-in. We haven't checked the bag in, sir, the agent said flatly. It came through this lane. Grant swallowed. That more than anything nearly undid him. Not the case, not the unwrapping. That swallowed. Because it was so ordinary, so human. The involuntary reflex of a man whose throat had suddenly gone dry. After months of being studied, managed, and quietly erased, I was watching him experience the simplest possible consequence, fear in his own body. Lila's eyes widened as the first officer examined the lock. Grant, say something. He didn't look at her. That was when she understood she was alone. It happened visibly. Her posture changed first, then her mouth. The entitled confidence slid off her face in strips, leaving behind a much younger woman than the one who had smirked at boardroom dinners and charity gals. 31 suddenly looked like 21. She took a step toward him, but the second agent raised a hand. Stay where you are. Great, she said again, softer now. What is happening? I set my coffee on the stainless counter beside me and slipped my hands into the pockets of my coat, so no one would see how cold they had become. This was the dangerous part, not emotional, but procedural. A public collapse is only satisfying if it lands on the truth. One wrong sentence, one impulsive lurch, and Grant would pivot back into victimhood. He'd done it his whole life. The officer turned to Lila. Do you have a key or code for this case? No. Do you know what's inside it? No. Did anyone else have access to the bag? She looked straight at Grant. The silence that followed was the ugliest thing I had ever heard. The officer noticed it too. His gaze shifted between them, taking the expensive coat, the identical boarding suit, the husband who looked sick, the assistant who looked betrayed, and the wife, and just far enough away to make it geometry, the whole scene impossible to ignore. Ma'am, he said to me, are you traveling with these people? Grant turned toward me so sharply his shoulder brushed the metal divider. I met the officer's eye. Yes. Name. Evelyn Hart. Relationship to the other passengers. I let the beat land before answering. Grant Harper is my husband. Lila Bennett is his executive assistant. It was the cleanest sentence I've ever spoken. Lila flinched as if I slapped her. Grant recovered first. Of course he did. He dragged a hand over his face, straightened, and summoned that low, strained sincerity he used when he wanted a room to trust him.
I laughed when my daughter handed me a printed piece of paper.
Miss Bennett works for me. She happened to be on the same flight for business. I don't know what that case is, but my wife has been under a lot of stress lately. He stopped. Not because of me. Because a man in a dark security blazer had just stepped into the lane from the far end of the checkpoint, scanned the scene once, and changed direction toward us. Marcus Reed was 6'2", broad-shouldered, and built like someone who had spent years being underestimated by people with office jobs. He worked airport security investigations on the federal side now, but he still carried himself like the military police officer he used to be economically reliable and impossible to rattle. He was also married to Dana, which meant he had seen me at enough dinners and hospital fundraisers to know exactly how I looked when I was lying, and exactly how I looked when I was furious. Right now I wasn't even. Morning, Marcus said to the officers, showing his credentials. What do we have? Positive K9 alert, one of them said. Unidentified locked case recovered from the passenger's carry-on. Marcus's gaze moved to the table, then to Lila, then to Grant, and finally to me. His expression didn't change much, but I saw the recognition settle him. Mrs. Harper, he said. Marcus. Grant looked from one of us to the other. We know each other. Marcus ignored him. You all right? Yes, I said. At the moment, yes. The moment stretched. Marcus had always been smart enough to hear what wasn't being said. His eyes dropped briefly to the case, then came back to my face. Whatever he saw there made him go very still. All right, he said to the agents. Continue your screening. The case was opened under controlled inspection a minute later. I won't pretend that was easy to watch. Even knowing exactly what was inside, even knowing it was no longer tied to my name, I felt my pulse slam against my ribs from the movement. The vacuum-sealed packets came out first. Lila made a choking sound. Grant didn't move. Then the flash drive appeared in the foam lining beneath the packets. And I watched the exact second he understood the problem had just become terminal. The drugs were bad. The drive was fatal. Contraband might be explained away with luck corruption or a panicked lie. A digital trail was harder. A digital trail plus shell vendors, plus forged authorizations, plus a mistress with her fingerprints all over the vendor list. That was the kind of mess that kept people in federal buildings for years. Sir, one of the agents said to Grant, on the table. I haven't touched anything. Step back anyway. Lila turned on him then finally, and all the glamour vanished. Grant, what is that? Her voice cracked on the last word. Tell them this isn't mine. He stared at her with open contempt. It was the first honest expression I had seen on his face in months. I don't know what you packed, he said. The words hit her like a physical blow. You can't be serious. I told you to handle your own luggage. Oh my God. She shook her head, tears gathering too fast. Oh my God, Grant. There it was the moment she understood she had never been his partner. She was just another container. Another place to stash risk until it became inconvenient. Marcus looked at the drive, then at me. Mrs. Harper, do you know anything about this case? Grant's head whipped toward me. I hear you trying to predict me. Would I stay silent? Would I hedge? Would I play the careful wife and let the officials discover things in their own time? That was the version of me he had spent months engineering, the tired, hesitant woman who could be talked over, corrected, and slowly rewritten in front of strangers. He had built his entire future around her. I took my hands out of my coat pocket. Yes. Grant went completely still. Marcus's voice stayed even. Go on. That case was in my suitcase last night. The words landed like a dropped tray in a church. Lila stared at me. One of the agents looked up sharply. Grant made a small sound, half inhale, half warning, but I kept going. I watched my husband hide it there around 2 in the morning, I said. He cut into the lining and slid it inside the frame. I removed it after he fell asleep. I opened it in my own office. I copied the contents of the flash drive, photographed the case, photographed the damage to my suitcase, and sent the evidence to a secure account. Marcus didn't interrupt. He just held my gaze and listened. The drive contains financial records tied to Halcyon Biotech, I said. Shell vendors' false consulting agreements, forged approvals, and documents designed to frame me as the person moving money. Some of the vendors route through entities connected to Ms. Bennett. I looked at Lila then, and for the first time I saw something other than vanity in her face. Fear. I don't know how much she knows, but I know what my husband intended. Grant found his voice at last. This is insane. No, I said quietly. It's organized. He took a step toward me, all polish gone now. You expect anyone to believe I planted narcotics in my own wife's luggage? I expect them to believe exactly what your records show.
You will be completely diabetes free in just 24 hours. If not, my credit ends tomorrow. I've created a breakthrough method that this rare royal link scramble is a symbol of wealth, power, and abundance. You're attracting money day by day, second by second. This is not an automatic. Say this to yourself now. Double tap, follow, and unlock your wealth code.
She's been
Unlimited
paranoid for
prosperity
months.
is moving
She's
toward you.
obsessed.
It's
She's
working.
gone through my phone, my office, You're exhausted, Ed, I said. He stopped. I don't think anyone else in that checkpoint understood why the words hit as hard as they did. But Grant did. He knew I was handing his own script back to him in pieces. I took one step closer, just enough that he had to hear me over the hum of the conveyor belt and the distant boarding announcement. You're not thinking straight, I said. His face changed. Not rage this time. Not fear either. Something worse. Recognition. The sick, helpless recognition of a man realizing the sentence he used to shrink me had just become evidence of the entire architecture of things. Every time he'd said it, every time he'd smiled and implied I was too tired, too emotional, too unstable to trust my own eyes. It was all standing in the open now, with tenderness, shown for what it really was perfection. Lila started crying in earnest. Not pretty crying, not movie crying, full body mascara streaking panic. Grant, please tell them I didn't know about any of this. He didn't even look at them. Agents separated them within minutes. Marcus requested secondary imaging and a digital hold.
To get snatched by
Altion's name clearly the right kind of image
more
and the right kind of offer.
My daughter recommended this app, and I decided to try the 28-day kitchen calendar workout. I'm now in my second week and already noticing changes.
To regain
I feel
control
more
once
energized
asking for
with my
his attorney once by telling an agent I was having a mental health issue. Neither landed. Men like Grant spend so much time managing private rooms that they forget constitutionally he was hired to farm their lives.
Who kept them out?
He walked him away, he turned once and looked
A little bit.
I had expected war, maybe hatred, maybe a bomb. But what I saw instead was disbelief so profound it almost made me look young. Not innocent, not shy, but young in the way powerful men sometimes do when the world stops agreeing to their version. He truly hadn't thought I would fight like this. Lila was taken in another direction, trying hard enough to shake. I didn't follow either of them with my eyes. I just stood there in the bright airport light, breathing in coffee disinfectant, and the faint electrical smell of the scanner belt, and let the adrenaline drain out of me in slow, careful waves. Marcus came back after a while with a paper cup of water. You okay? He asked. I took the cup. I will be. That was one hell of a morning. Yes, I said, it really was. He studied me for a moment. Dane is going to kill me if I don't ask whether you need someone with you. A laugh escaped me before I could stop it. Small, shaky, real. I might need a lot of things, but right now I need breakfast that I can help with. I looked past him at the huge airport windows where the first clean band of sunrise had started to break over the tarmac, turning the glass pale gold. Planes taxied in the distance. People hurried past us, dragging roller bags and half-finished coffees, unaware that my marriage had just ended 20 feet from the sea concourse scanner. And maybe that was the strangest part of all. The world didn't pause because your life cracked open. It kept boarding flights and steaming milk and calling Zone 3 to the gate. It kept moving, which meant you could move too. Grant had spent months trying to make me doubt my heart, my instinct, my own name inside my own life. He wanted me frightened, discredited, erased. Instead, he gave me the clearest view I'd ever had of him and of myself. I was not the woman he had been talking to in that kitchen all winter. I was not tired. I was not confused. And I was certainly not done. I canceled the London flight. I called my daughter before the news could reach her some other way. Then I walked out of O'Hare with a cold shiver, my suitcase in one hand, and my coat buttoned high against the wind, feeling lighter than I had in years. If you've ever had someone slowly try to rewrite your reality, if you've ever been told you were too emotional, too forgetful, too tired to trust what you know in your bones, I hope you remember that. Sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do to a manipulator is stay calm long enough to see the whole thing. And if this story stays with you, it's not to do with you. Read it and on the way to tell you whether you would have stopped Grant sooner than I would. We have many more stories like this to share stories about betrayal and power, and the quiet moments when we finally tasted power. So if you want to keep walking that road with us, subscribe and stay close. There's a lot more ahead. My name is Madison Clark. I'm 33 years old. I manage a luxury hotel in downtown Philadelphia. And 6 months ago, my older sister looked at my father in a hospital waiting room while I lay unconscious with tubes in my throat. And my heart barely holding together, and she said, "I don't know. It won't take a surgery. Think about what that comes to do for us," she said. She didn't whisper. She confronted. She started to lay me fancy reservations. Clear, practical, fun. My father didn't argue. He didn't push back. He didn't say, "Wait, that's my daughter-in-law. Let me think about it." He looked at Olivia, his old one, the one who'd always trusted, the one who always agreed with him, and he nodded. He stood up. We walked out of the hospital together.
You
I
doing?
did not sign the surgical consent form. They did not look through the glass of me lying in
Truly, you're into color when reading. And if this wasn't purposeful breeding, trying to get such a magnificent mole, why was Aurora Star neglected and dumped into an auction lot for accidents in her pregnancy? It just makes the mystery of who Aurora is and where it came from even bigger. The reason I've held off on making this video is because her space is so much bigger than just the coat color. This is the ultimate confirmation of the universe. My entire personality started 2.5 years ago when I rescued her, pregnant, busting hair, children, gave birth to, even the odds. A random female rescued from a Utah auction as I'm actively fighting to build the foundation for permanent sanctuary. Gives birth to a busted out son. It's a beautiful full circle confirmation. I was meant to
My
rescue
mother
Aurora.
asked why her newborn daughter wasn't breathing right. I was 2 years old when they opened my chest. The surgery took 9 hours. The girl nearly destroyed my tongue.
I walked into a
My
Utah
mother,
auction,
Karen, picked
pulled
up
out
double
an
shifts at the
emaciated,
school
pregnant
district office
baby
for
bear
years
named
to pay
Aurora.
it down.
She was skin and bones.
She
So
never
when I
complained
starved
about
while
it,
she was
at
carrying
least
me
not to
life,
me.
had
My
absolutely
father,
no
Robert
idea what
Clark,
she was.
handled it differently. He never forgot the number, and he never let me forget it either. I was 6.
Yeah.
I'd asked for a new pair of rain boots. Mine had a crack along the sole, and my socks got soaked
This is a
through every
really
time it rained.
important story for
He
anyone
was sitting
dealing
at the
with
kitchen
worries
table
about
with a
their
stack
blood
of
sugar
medical
or
bills spread in
diabetes,
front of him
or
with
if
a
you
losing
have.
hand at cards. He didn't look up. He just said it. Do you know how much you cost this family, Madison? I stood in the doorway holding my wet socks. I was 6 years old. I didn't know what to say. So I said nothing. I didn't get the boots. By the time I was 10, I'd stopped asking for anything. Not shoes, not school supplies, not field trip money. I figured out early that every request came with a cost that had nothing to do with price tag. It came with his eyes, the way they'd narrow just slightly, the way his jaw would set before he answered, like he was calculating not just the dollars but the years of resentment behind it. By 13, I was babysitting 3 houses on our block every weekend to pay for my own supplies. By 18, I signed my first student loan alone at a folding table in the guidance counselor's office. While 2 miles away, my older sister Olivia was packing for the state university our parents were funding in full. Nobody at that table told me this was unusual. Nobody at home told me it was unfair. And I didn't question it, because in the Clark household, there was a system, and the system had been in place so long it felt like gravity. You don't question gravity, you just live under it. Olivia got a car the day she turned 18. I rode the bus until I could afford a used Civic with 140,000 miles on it. Olivia got her tuition paid in full, books included. I got a repayment plan and a credit score that followed me for a decade. Olivia got birthday dinners at nice restaurants, the kind with tall napkins and candles.
This rare leaf insect is
I
not
got
a
a box
box
cake
creature.
with a card
It is
signed
a
only by my mother.
Sleep on your
When
side,
Olivia
and my
turned
blood pressure
25,
needed to see
my
this.
father
He was
co-signed a
some
business
random
deal
guy on
so she could
Facebook
open
who
her own
basically
real
saved my
estate
life.
group.
I'm on this
He
Facebook
took
group
her to
for
lunch
folks
that
with high
day.
blood
He
pressure
told
that
her
has
he
like
was proud.
91,000 members.
When I turned 25, I'd just been promoted to assistant manager at the hotel. I called my father to tell him. He listened for about 15 seconds and said, "That's nice, Madison. I hope it pays enough to cover your loan."
mixed baking soda
And
with
here's the
lemon
part
before
that's
bed.
hardest to
Watch your
explain.
belly
I
flatten
wasn't
in just
angry.
3 days.
I
This is the
genuinely
baking soda
believed
water
I
shot
owed
that
it.
took me from
My father had said
198
it
to
so many times,
156
in
pounds
so
in
many
just 2
ways,
weeks.
over so many
And the
years,
best part,
that
it's
the debt
natural,
felt as
easy,
real as
has
the
zero
scar on
side
my
effects,
chest.
and takes
This
less
family
than
has
a minute to
sacrificed
make.
too much for
Grab a
you
pen and
already.
paper, write this down,
That
and
was his
watch your
favorite
GM
verse.
start.
He said it the way someone quotes scripture, like it was an undeniable truth carved into the foundation of our house. I carried that debt the way I carried my hotel badge every morning, clipped to my jacket without thinking, so familiar I forgot it was there. But there was one person who never mentioned the debt. Not once. Not a single time in my entire life. My grandfather, Harold Bennett. Harold lived alone in a 2-story wooden house on the
I
outskirts
think
of
after this
Green
guy
Mountain.
lands, I'm gonna quit this game forever.
Plank floors that creaked in exactly the same spots they'd creaked for 38 years. A kitchen table stained with decades of coffee rings. A porch swing that groaned when the wind pushed it and groaned louder when someone sat in it. He'd lived in that house since before my mother was born, raised her there, buried my grandmother Margaret from there, kept the vegetable garden alive through every winter since, even when his knees got bad. Even when his hands started shaking, even when the doctor told him to take it easy, and Harold told the doctor to mind his own business. I started visiting him every Saturday when I was 24. Fresh out of hospitality school, drowning in student debt, working double shifts at the hotel and still barely covering rent. I
Somebody
spent
saved
45
my
minutes each
card.
way, bring him
Why?
groceries, check his blood pressure with a cup I'd learned to use from a first aid course,
What
and
happened?
then sit on that porch seat and
Somebody
listen to him
saved
talk.
my bank
He
card.
talked about the weather,
No, I didn't. No, you didn't.
about the neighbor's dog that kept digging
I
up his
didn't.
tomatoes. He talked about my grandmother, about how she used to come while she cooked, and how the house still smelled like her perfume sometimes when the windows were open just right. He never said you owe me. He never reminded me what I caused. He said things like, "Tell me about your week, sweetheart." He said, "Did you eat today?" He said, "Sit down, Madison. You look tired." He made scrambled eggs every Saturday morning whether I was hungry or not, and he didn't let me leave until I'd eaten at least one plate. The eggs were always slightly overcooked and always slightly undersalted, and they were the best thing I ate every single week. Harold watched my father carefully. I didn't realize it at the time, but he saw it.
That's enough for now.
He noticed when I showed up wearing shoes that were falling apart. He noticed when I flinched at the mention of money. He noticed